Welcome to SCOTUStalk. I'm Amy Howe. Thanks for joining us. Today we're lucky enough to have with us Tony Mauro, who retired this summer after nearly 40 years covering the Supreme Court. Tony, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Wow. So just let's start at the beginning. How did you get started covering the Supreme Court?
Well, early in my journalism career, I covered the courts in South Jersey, southern New Jersey, in Camden, and also the Third Circuit and the New Jersey Supreme Court. And my editor thought I was doing a good job, and he said, "You ought to go to law school." And I did for exactly 4 weeks at Rutgers Camden Law School. I enjoyed it, but I was doing it at the same time I was working full-time, and I just couldn't do both.
Sure.
But I kept up with the court beat, and my editor got transferred down to Washington, and he said, if you can cover the New Jersey Supreme Court, you can cover the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's how it started, and that was almost exactly 40 years ago.
Wow.
In 1979.
And so how has covering the U.S. Supreme Court changed, for better or for worse, during the past 40 years?
In a lot of ways. Mostly, I think, better. When I first got to the court, the Supreme Court press corps had it pretty easy. We would watch opinion announcements and watch the hearings, and then we'd go to the court cafeteria and have lunch, and a couple hours later we'd go back to our offices and write our stories. And obviously that can't happen anymore. So, we're now pre-writing decision stories. There's a deadline every minute. And I think we do lose something by that, because it can be too fast. The rest of it, I think it's all good. There are fewer reporters who actually sort of reside at the Supreme Court than there used to be. But there are so many other methods of disseminating information about the court, SCOTUS blog being the premier one of those. So I think overall the public is getting a whole lot more information about the Supreme Court than it used to.
Are there any particular memories when you think back about covering the court that really stand out, whether you're talking about cases or confirmation hearings, oral arguments, retirements?
Well, some of all of those. I'd say the most amazing events that I covered were the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing. There was just so much electricity and anger in that hearing room. It was just unbelievable, and never seen anything like it since.
The Clarence Thomas hearings were in 1991, so I think a lot of people, certainly I remember them quite well, but a lot of younger people may not remember them. They were even more intense, you think, than the Kavanaugh hearings last year?
Well, certainly they were kind of in the same ballpark, but in terms of intensity and the awfulness of what was being accused, for both of them, really. You would think this can't happen for the Supreme Court nominee to have this kind of controversy, but there it was. And I'd say, as far as cases go, Bush versus Gore was the most incredible. The idea that the Supreme Court, which is usually off to the side of things, was now ground zero, and that was going to decide who's going to be president. It was just, I never thought that would ever happen. I remember I wrote a column saying, Supreme Court won't take up Florida election dispute, and I was totally wrong about that. But it was so intense. You would come out of the Supreme Court, and there would be people just roaring at each other, just both sides so angry. So that was a big one. And
you were the pioneer covering minority law clerk hiring by the justices. What prompted you to start paying attention to this issue?
Well, that was when I was covering the Supreme Court for USA Today. That was in 1998, and one of the things I had learned on the beat was how important law clerks really are to the whole Supreme Court, and yet nobody knew about them. They were very under the radar, and I thought we really should take a look at these law clerks and who they are, why they're so powerful, how they get there. And then we decided to make a demographics study of it, just to see who's getting this amazing opportunity to be a Supreme Court law clerk. It was a difficult story to write because the Supreme Court does not have or give out information about the demographics of the clerks. So I had to go through it kind of one by one of each clerk to see, it's sort of awkward to call somebody up and say, are you Hispanic, are you black? And we came up with the numbers, and it was really shocking. At that point, among the justices who were sitting their entire tenure, there was only 1.8% of the clerks hired were African American, 1% Hispanic, Asian Americans 4.5%, and women were only 1/4 of the law clerks at that time.
1998, wow.
Yeah, and it was shocking, and it did get a lot of reaction. There were some protests in front of the Supreme Court. People got arrested over it. So I felt like it was an important story to tell, and at least one justice told me it was eye-opening and that it helped the justices and their feeder judges and the feeder law professors to be aware that there should be more diversity.
And do you think the court has made progress?
Pretty slim. It's I kind of redid the survey in 2017 and found that things have improved. The percentage of African Americans now is about 4%. Asian Americans gone to 9%, and Hispanics are still the numbers are very low. And now women make up roughly 1/3 of the law clerks. So there's still a lot to go, and it's hard to understand why it's so difficult or why the numbers don't go up. I mean, there are many factors, one of which is that top tier minority students are going to have a lot of other opportunities. I remember when I did the original study, people kept telling me about the African American Harvard Law School student who got away, and it turned out
Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama, yeah, and he made out pretty well without being a clerk. But there
Get his bonus later.
Yeah, right. But it's but there also seems to be a feeling among the justices that they don't reach out very much to seek out minority clerks. I talked to a lot of professors, and they said they had never heard a justice say, you can do better than this. Give me a more diverse palette of potential clerks. So there's some kind of it just doesn't work for some reason, and the numbers just don't get very bigger. One exception I would say is Justice Kavanaugh, who actually on the D.C. Circuit he did reach out to a lot of minority law student organizations, and really did try to recruit them, and he succeeded, and then he sent a lot of them to the Supreme Court itself. So he, even at the district court level, he helped boost the numbers.
And sort of a related question is the educational diversity, getting your law clerks from somewhere other than Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. Have you tracked that at all? Have you sort of, at least anecdotally, have you seen any changes in that among the justices? Justice Thomas, for example,
right,
tends to hire from beyond those three law schools.
Yeah, I was going to say he probably is the single justice who really has made a point of going beyond Harvard, Yale, and Stanford and Chicago. The rest of the justices still feel like, we can't take a chance on somebody from a third-tier law school, which just seems ridiculous. There are some great students in all kinds of schools, and also the history of Supreme Court clerks, there were some justices who would, gladly recruit the son of a friend as a law clerk, and the Supreme Court building hasn't crumbled. Somehow they managed to work out, and so I think I don't understand really the reluctance of justices to go beyond Harvard and Yale.
Speaking of law clerks, the Supreme Court law clerks finish at the Supreme Court and they get paid a huge bonus. What is the bonus now? Do you know?
I think it's hovering around $400,000, maybe more. And yeah, it is incredible. And that's another factor that made my diversity study important, because if there are few minorities being clerks, there are few minorities who have that the golden ticket that'll help them finish their law school debt and things like that. In addition to the bonuses, they are set up for top tier jobs, and just the idea that minority law clerks are not getting that opportunity was really what got me most interested in that issue.
Sure, can't open the doors if you're not in the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other broader implications to paying law clerks these kinds of bonuses?
I think that just the fact that they come out of this clerkship, and a lot of them go on to law firms briefly, or they go into government service, and then more and more the justices are recruiting law clerks who have had some legal experience before coming there. But again, it's just an opportunity thing that they're. I'm not sure they deserve that kind of a bonus, but that's what the market has carried on. The market bears it, and so that's what's going to happen.
That's what's going to happen. Do you think we're going to see cameras in the courtroom or live audio anytime soon?
Well, I've been beating the drums on that issue for the entire time I've covered the court.
I appreciate it.
And I used to think, well, at least it'll happen before the turn of the century, and that's come and gone. And now I just hope it'll happen during my lifetime, and I'm not even sure that's going to happen. There just seems to be this resistance that won't go away. Part of it is the justices feel like they're the only institution left that can say no, mm-hmm. And so they covet that, and they decide, we don't want to mess up a good thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of attitude, and they feel like introducing cameras and microphones into the Supreme Court for broadcasting purposes will mess up the whole system. It'll change the dynamics of oral arguments, and I don't buy that. States Supreme Courts have done this for decades without any problem. But I think there's this feeling of exceptionalism too, that the Supreme Court is different from every other court, and they don't have to follow the rules that anybody else does. So I really am not that optimistic that it's going to happen anytime soon. Perhaps baby steps like same-day audio. Even that they tried it for a few years, but now they have they hardly ever allow that. And maybe simultaneous or live streaming would be great, but I think they're reluctant about that too. I think they're worried about hecklers coming to the court and saying bad things. They also worry about the justices talking to each other on the bench, and that stuff would come out. They're just very skittish about the whole thing, and I don't know what we can do about it, except the opinion announcement is a summary, and it's announced by the majority, the justice in the majority who wrote the opinion. And sometimes they oversimplifies or they exaggerate what a decision says, or it's like the justice's only chance to have spin control. So they don't want the opinion announcement to stand as a proxy for the actual decision. So they don't want that broadcast. They don't want to hear on the nightly news that the opinion announcement text. That's the reason.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't buy that either. So.
All right. What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out as a Supreme Court reporter?
I've always given the advice that's more and more antiquated as years go by, but the advice is make the time to actually read the decision from start to finish. You never know what you're missing in the footnote 17 on page 42. You really have to close the door and read the opinion. Amazing things can be discovered when you look at the dissents. In fact, I usually tell reporters read the dissent first, and
Yes.
because then you're going to see what the highlights of the majority. But anyway, all of that advice goes by the boards because you have to be on deadline. You have to get your story up about a decision within 10 minutes, and there's no time to read the whole thing. So that's unfortunate.
Tony Mauro, thanks for joining us.
Oh,
thanks for everything.
happy to do it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's another episode of SCOTUStalk. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Case Text, our sponsor, and thanks to our production team, Katie Bart, Cal Goldie, and Edith Roberts.